Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I wanted to do something that was more of a beginner project, and I'm going to make a ring that isn't really the beginner project itself, but I need a ring to do the second part of this, and so I'm just going to include that in the video as well. So the ring itself is probably more of an intermediate project because it's got a step bezel that we have to make for a faceted stone. But the project itself is going to be kind of an accent stacker ring. Periodically I'll have someone who has an engagement ring who wants to have a ring that matches the side of it, like fits up tight against it on one side. And so this is kind of one of those sorts of things, and it doesn't have to be for an engagement ring, it could just be a novelty sort of ring for you. But I'm going to make just a little kind of thing that spoons with the original rings. Before we get started though, I wanted to thank some groups of people. My patrons over on Patreon are my core group of supporters. I have a new one, Sarah M. Thanks for signing up. I really do appreciate your support. I think you'll find that the group of people over there is super nice and super knowledgeable and a really great place to hang out with other people who have similar interests. So thank you to all my previous patrons as well for your not only your financial support, but just for making such a cool place. The other group is my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 22,100, I think, which is awesome. Thanks for that. I really appreciate it when people let me know that I've helped them in some ways. I want you to know that that sort of input is really useful in keeping me going when I'm a little bit tired or just frustrated with things or whatever. So thanks for that. That helps me to keep going. I do also appreciate your financial contributions, like the Buy Me a Coffees and the Super Thanks. And for those of you who've bought merch or my ebooks, those things all really help to keep me afloat. And I do think I do really appreciate those as well. All right, well, let's get started on this project. So this is one of my design idea sketchbooks, which are available on my merch store. I find them pretty useful. Some of the more recent ones, there's several different designs, have different charts on the back. This one's a gauge to inches to millimeters chart, which I find super useful. There's another one that's just fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeters, and that is also another useful one. The real value to me, though, is the little dot matrix in the background on the pages, because it helps me to keep things sort of symmetrical when I sketch up my designs. So like that a lot, and it helps me to draw things better. So today's drawing is not complicated. And what I'm going to do initially, like I said, the first part is probably an intermediate project, but it's just a basic bezel set faceted stone in a simple band, and I'm going to use this Peridot, which I forgot to measure it, but it's a pretty Peridot. I picked up at the last show last year, the gem show in Denver. I'm going to call it a 9x7. It's pretty close to that. Let's put that on here. 9x7 Peridot. Okay, and so let's go ahead and make a ring for that. The materials I'm going to use for both of these pieces are pretty simple. I have some 12 gauge square wire, which I use a lot of square wire. I think it's useful. And this will both be the band for this and the band for this, which I'm going to texture, I think, with just a stamp to give it some sparkle. But we'll use this to make the band for this ring. I cut it to be about an 8.5, if I remember right, which included measuring for an 8.5 and then deducting the length of or the width of the stone, because the bezel itself is going to become part of the length of the band, if that makes sense. We just deduct that length from the overall length of a size set 8.5, and that gets us pretty close. So let's make a bezel for this. The bezel I'm using is 26 gauge, which is 0.41 millimeters, and I usually get 3/16 of an inch, which is 4.76 millimeters. It's tall enough for most things, and I can file it shorter. And I get asked once in a while why I don't get 1/8 inch and stuff like that, and it's just easier to keep track of one size, pretty much. And I can always file it down and cut it down to the size I need. Alright, so let's make a bezel for this guy. If you've never made a step bezel, this probably shouldn't be your first project. You want to work on a few cabochon bezels with closed backs to start with. Although, to be honest, it's not really that hard to make an open back bezel, I think, once you have a little bit of soldering experience. I was a little intimidated when I first was making jewelry about dealing with faceted stones. Mostly just because I wasn't really taught how to do it. I was taught how to do basic bezel for a cabochon, and that's about it. So I had to kind of fumble my way into it. And the way I create, you can buy a pre-made step bezel if you want to, or you can make it in a number of different ways. I do it kind of a simple way. I just make a couple of jump rings out of 18 gauge wire to use as a step, and I solder them to the inside of this, one on top of the other, and that works pretty well. I occasionally will use some flat and square wire as a step, but when you do make a bezel, though, give yourself a little bit of extra beyond where they meet. Not very much, just a skosh. And that's because we're going to file the ends a little bit, just to make them nice and flat. So we're going to take a little bit of material off of there. If you haven't been to my channel before, I use primarily hard silver sheet solder. I will occasionally use some paste solder anymore of different temperatures. And I use a dribble or a liquid flux that I dribble on with a dropper bottle. My torch is a Silversmith model. It's their acetylene air torch, and I really like this one. I've been using one of these for many years, and it's been a great torch for me. It draws in atmospheric air to mix with the gas to make it burn hotter. Not as hot as oxyacetylene, where it's pumping pure oxygen into the flame, but plenty hot to work with silver in, and a nice change from just using a propane or a butane torch. I think it'll give you a significant amount of heat, more than those will. And so I really like using them. But I use a #1 tip for almost everything. I'm going to set this over here so I don't lose track of him. So let's see if we can get this shaped a little better. I would ask you if you enjoy my videos, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, because the YouTube algorithm looks at that and it helps to get my channel promoted. My views have been down a little bit lately, so it also helps when you leave a comment. So if you got a question or a suggestion for a video, or just want to say hi or whatever, that's always really nice. Not only does it help the channel, I like hearing from you, so people are very nice in the comments. So I think we got the size just about right there. That fits just snugly in there. I think that'll be a pretty little ring. Someone will love that. I first started doing this back in the mid-90s when I was teaching high school. I retired from teaching after about 30 years in 2019, I think. But on the side I was making jewelry because I was kind of a rock hound and interested in doing something with some of the cool rocks I was finding. So I took a couple of, 6-week long, once a week kind of classes to learn the basics, and I really liked doing it. So it seems like a really long time ago now. Alright, so let's make a little step for this. Boy, that is really snug in there. So this is a big enough stone to where the pavilion is kind of deep, and so we want to make sure it sits up high enough to where that doesn't stick out the back of the bezel, because you don't want that poking into the top of your finger when you're wearing the ring. Probably wouldn't be super comfortable. So we're going to do at least 2 levels, and then we'll see how it sits in there. And if we need to, we'll add a 3rd one. Like I said, this is just one way to make a step bezel. When I first started back then, it probably took me about 5 or 6 years before I really started trying to set faceted stones very often. But setting them in a bezel is a good way to start before you attempt, prong settings and stuff like that. So, although if you're ready to do that, I have quite a few videos on various kinds of prong settings. There's even a playlist on my main page called Projects with Prong Settings. So there's a number of different kinds. On these I usually cut them a little bit too big and then snip out pieces until they fit in there just nicely. Let's make sure it's kind of in the same plane here. I'll double check to make sure it's really flat if we're ready to put it in there. So, but I got pretty close on that one. I usually don't get that close on the first try. So let's make another one. You can also, if you want to, use a jump ring mandrel if you want to shape these. The only problem with those kinds of things are that all ovals are not the same. So, although you can get it kind of close, and then let's see how these go together. I'll tell you what, let's solder those 2 in. Let me just double check to make sure they're sitting nice and flat. If one of them is tighter than the other one, put that tight one on the bottom, because that'll be less likely to show where they come together in a crack. So nobody wants an embarrassing crack on the underside of their bezel. The easiest way I've ever found to do this sort of a solder operation is to just put a few pieces on the pad. Once we have everything all tucked in the bottom there flat, let's go ahead and flux it, and we'll just plop it on top of that and then heat it till it pulls it up in there. One thing about doing this sort of bezel with, since I'm using fine silver on the outside, which has a higher melting temperature than sterling silver, which is on the inside, for those of you who don't know what that means, sterling silver is an alloy of 7.5% copper and 92.5% silver. Fine silver, which is a little bit softer and more malleable, is pure silver, or as close as they can get it. And that's why we use that for the bezel on the outside. It's a little softer and easier to bend, which we need towards the end there. So, but my point was, apparently I'm sidetrackable today. My point was that because the melting temperature of sterling is slightly lower than fine, if you overheat it, I've actually seen and done this a few times myself, where the wires inside start to melt and just start to flow up the sides of the inside of the bezel. If that happens, you probably just want to start over again on your bezel. There's not much you can do to salvage that. But after you redo it, when you go to solder it, just keep an eye on the heat and back it off if it starts to get a little bit too hot. The cool thing is, if you get a good solder seam here, then when you file it down, it'll end up looking like a nice flat surface with a relatively symmetrical, kind of step in there. So, all right, so let's put a band on that. This is the one I was going to use, and I want it to just go right into the sides of this, but I could do it just straight in like that, but then when you go to bend it, it's going to put some undue pressure on the bezel and cause it to distort like that. And so I'm going to go ahead and make it into the ring shank shape, and then we'll actually file the ends to be more of a vertical connection to this. So what I'm doing by going back and forth on the mandrel, because it's sloped, it'll tend to steer it to do that on one side. So if I go back and forth, it does it a little bit one way and then a little bit the other way, so you end up having to correct a lot less. But I like to get it round kind of on the lower end of the mandrel here, the skinnier side, because that way it'll maintain its shape as we slide it up to the side we want it to be. If that makes any sense. That's within the size range of what I was looking for. At this point, it's probably good to correct any kind of little torque that it did. The reason it does that is because we're compressing the inside here of the silver and we're stretching out the outside of the silver. So it tries to turn to find an easier way, because a square shape like this. Now what we need to do is, we're just going to put that in there, but we need it to be vertical on these right here. So I'm going to try and do this. Sometimes I'll do this with my third hand in order to space out the ends here so that it's at a place where neither the band or the bezel can drop off. Kind of like that. And I'm going to, in order to do this, you don't have to do it this way. You could kind of put some paste solder or something there if you wanted to. I like to pick solder because it allows me to place solder really precisely. If you're interested in learning how to do that, I have a really good video, I think. It's been pretty popular anyway. I get a lot of people saying it helped them a lot. Kind of takes you to a different level of abilities when you start to get the hang of that. Oh, I meant to check to see how deep the stone's at on here. We can still put a third ring in there if we need to. A little forgetful today, I guess. Okay, so with pick soldering, like, you can pick it right up on the end of this titanium pick. Oopsie. When you're heating this, most of the mass of the piece is in the band down there. Boy, I'm just really klutzy today. Hopefully that didn't move it too much. So you got to get them both up to temperature, the bezel and the band. The third hand soaks up a lot of heat. Boy, I keep hitting things. It'll be interesting if this comes out to be straight or not. Okay, I'm going to let that pickle for a little while, and then we'll come back and make the little kind of spoon piece for it. So I let it pickle for a little while, and I think our next step, if we're going to make something that's kind of like wraps around this sort of, we need to kind of trace the shape of the bezel there. We need a piece of 12 gauge that goes about like that. I'm going to make it a little bit longer than that just because I want to have some excess. And once we get that shaped, I think we need to, maybe not much on this one. I was going to say we need to curve it a little bit this way, but I don't know. We'll have to play it by ear as we go. So I think maybe let's use I have a pair of bail making pliers that work pretty well for this kind of thing. We need to go kind of that size. Let's just use the biggest one here and see how it works. Let's file the end file. So let's, I think I'm just going to cut it off straight across there. That's definitely has some extra then. But I think, if you notice, this curves back in a little bit more, so we may need to manually curve that just a skosh. So I think maybe we can take a pin and mark right kind of where that's going to meet. Let's cut it off there and see what happens. I guess we should mark which side we're planning on matching, because they may not be exactly alike. Just put a little mark like that. Now I think let's just file this like this. This is another one of those situations where using your miter vise jig might help you. That's pretty good. Okay, so I want a band that's going to match up pretty closely to that other band, so I'm going to make the band bigger than it needs to be, and then we're going to have to do some filing at an angle in order to get it to meet this nicely. We'll see if we can't do that. think we're in the size range. I'm going to cut this just a tiny bit shorter. This is one of those ones where it might be useful to have one of these mandrels that has a flat side on it. So that way we can kind of figure out where to get this one to go to. I'm thinking for this particular one, it might be easier to deduct this thickness from the width of this and solder it to the outside of this way, and then we can just, it might make it easier. So we'll just go in as wide as this is, which should be about 2 millimeters this way and that way. I think I'm going to try that and see how that works. I can always remake this if it's not going to work that way. But I think it might be easier to solder on that way. Let's see. That way we'll be able to solder it to the side of the ring. So it looks like I need to go a little bit further though. We're getting into the size range maybe. Just a skosh more maybe. I think we could do it just about like that. So let's do this. If I color in the outside edge of this black, then I can use a pin to sharp a real, or to scratch a real distinct, specific. What's the word I'm looking for? Accurate. Pretty accurate line. So I think we can probably push this down into my little soft pad. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it off right here and then just gradually file it till they fit together nicely. Okay, so I've been filing and I used my rotary tool a little bit to kind of get things smoothed out. And I think I got it where it fits pretty well. So, and I'm thinking that might be nice if you did a jacket that goes all on either side, if you wanted to. Like, you could even solder them together with a bar underneath them or something like that, so that this one just slid down between them, you know, if there was a second one just like this. I did something like that for my wife's engagement ring when I first was doing this. I wasn't very good at soldering at that point though. So I got lucky and made it work, but it didn't fit quite as tight as this one. So so yeah, I think I was going to do a little star pattern on this. Where did that little stamp go? And I know I still haven't gotten a brass arrow yet. See, we just got kind of like a starburst little pattern. Once you do it over the top of most of this, it kind of blends together and seems more like kind of a random pattern. It'll be interesting to see if this changed this much and what we have to do to adjust it. Not too bad. I might just need to, it pooched it out a little bit. It was close to the edge on stamping, so if I file that flat on the inside again, it'll probably fit just fine. Okay, well, I will get that pickled and maybe fix my wife some dinner. Then I'll come back and set the stone and polish it. So, but yeah, I think that, you know, then you can wear it with that, or you could wear it with both. You know, it's a stacker. I wonder, it might be fun to just keep stacking them out and see how they go with different patterns. That might be kind of a cool idea. Tell me what you think of that idea. But cool, I'll get that pickled and we'll be back in a bit. Okay, we popped it in there, and I do this a little differently than some people. I use my chain nose pliers and the outside surfaces of it to set stones. So we use this flat side as a bezel pusher. Just try and get this to kind of sit in place. Once that feels like it's in there securely, I'm going to use this smooth outer edge of the rounded part as a burnishing tool. That's where we just rub that top edge. That's looking pretty nice. And then of course there's our main ring. Here's our little accent ring. I think it goes on this side better. So yeah, I kind of like that. I hope you do as well. Let me know what you think. What would you think if I did one that had something on the opposite side that matched? Because I think that might be a really pretty ring. You could even solder them together at the bottom so that they all kind of stay separate but together. Separate but together. Alright, so I'll get some better pictures and put them at the end. Okay, well that was the accent ring to go alongside of a pre-existing ring. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go, and I would love it if you would take a moment and go over to my main channel page. I have over 500 videos now, as I've been doing this at 3 per week for about 3.5 years. So there's a ton of content there, many projects at all different skill levels. So check those out. I'm sure you'll find something useful there or interesting. And I'd love it if you'd subscribe to my channel. The other thing is, in the video description down below, there are some important links if you're interested in finding out more about my Patreon, which is a cool place. The lowest tier allows you to have access to my videos without any advertisement, like on YouTube. So that's kind of nice. But the tiers above that have some additional privileges, like live streams and some exclusive videos that I make just for Patreon. So check that out. It's kind of a fun place, and it's kind of my bread and butter. So I'd love to see you over there as well. There's also a link to my ebooks, of which there are 2. There's a 2023 and 2024. Each one contains a page for each of the videos that I produced during that year. including a materials list, pictures, a picture of my sketch that I made, difficulty level, and some additional notes that I made about each of the projects, like what did I learn from the project, or would I do it differently if I was to do it again, that sorts of stuff. So it's a really valuable tool for someone who's a beginner, because it allows them to have a whole bunch of projects right at their fingertips, and it's a great way to support my channel. So I do appreciate that if you do that in advance. There's also a link just to my general merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks I showed you at the beginning. I find those super useful and a great way to keep track of what I've made, so in case I ever want to revisit that. So, all right, well, thanks for watching today. Take care. Happy silversmithing.